So we recently worked with a firm founder who watched about 100 million in AUM walk out of the door when two key associates left. And look, for most founders, that sounds like a disaster, but we looked at it differently, okay? And in this video, I'm going to explain why is that. Because look, at the end of the day, what happened to be a 100 million AUM problem was actually just an operating model problem that had been hidden in growth for so many years. And look, this is something at the end of the day that we've seen over and over again across not just professional services and wealth management firms, but across M&A advisory, law firms, accounting firms, whatever it might be. I mean, revenue at the end of the day can hide operational weaknesses until, one day things start breaking. Look, when the business is growing, founders, many times they tolerate inefficient employees and operations and infrastructures. They tolerate responsibilities that are unclear. They tolerate people who are technically competent, but in terms of culture, they are misaligned. And they also tolerate associates who have their own client relationships instead of institutional relationships. And then, they tell themselves, oh, well, we'll fix it later, until that later, becomes a $100 million problem, as I'm going to share with you today. And look, the lesson is that a major disruption can expose weaknesses that were previously too expensive or maybe too politically difficult to confront. And look, if you respond correctly, then the disruption becomes the catalyst for building a substantially stronger firm. It's all about perspective. Now, of course, our client didn't came to us super excited after losing 100 million, but again, we took this as an opportunity. So let's start with, literally the mistake that we see most often, the invisible operational leak. So a founder looks at an associate and many times asks, they ask, are they producing? Well, look, that's the wrong question, okay? Some of the better questions are, can this person operate inside our system? Do they strengthen or weaken the firm's culture? What is your culture? Because many advisors don't even know. Many founders don't know. The clients, do clients perceive the relationship as a belonging to the firm or to the individual? Then, can another employee execute the same process? Is knowledge documented? Is the client relationship, institutionalized? Or do they actually have the relationship at a personal level with the client? And what happens if this person leaves tomorrow? Because look, there is a fundamental difference between employee capacity and also organizational capacity. Let's say if one person leaves tomorrow and the firm loses relationships, knowledge, the process, and the revenue attached to that relationship, it means that as a founder, you didn't build an organization. You literally built a collection of individual practices underneath one brand. That's pretty much it. And that distinction becomes extremely expensive at scale. When you try, again, businesses do break at scale. So if you try to scale, this bottleneck is going to become evident. Now, let's consider some of the economics. And as you can see here, this is the $100 million AUM Illusion. Now, if we consider the economics, let's say two associates, they leave. And this is, literally the case scenario that we had with this client. So I want to make a case study out of it to, help you as well to see things maybe from a different perspective, because many founders don't look at these things until maybe it's too late. So if we consider the economics, two associates, they leave. A legacy assistant retires, and then the firm is losing about 100 million in AUM. I mean, on paper, yes, that's catastrophic. But then if we look underneath the headline, you know, the firm, I mean, yes, it's not just 100 million, right? It's in eliminating significant compensation, benefits, admin cost, office cost, management overhead, and other expensive, and other expenses associated to maintaining the organizational structure. So suddenly, the firm's recurring out-of-pocket overhead can fall drastically. I mean, in this case, it was towards a $20,000 per month baseline. Again, this depends on the firm exact structure. It depends, but in this case, that's about $240,000 a year. So the correct analysis here wouldn't be, 100 million disappeared. It would be, what economics disappeared with it. I mean, and what economics did we eliminate at the same time? Okay. Now, that's how serious operators think. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't really manage a firm through headlines. I mean, you manage it through unit economics, contribution margins, retention, productivity, enterprise value. So those are all things to take into consideration. I mean, someone thinking about, oh, well, he lost 100 million. That sounds very bad. But again, let's look at all of the numbers. And this is an opportunity to rebuild the firm with a stronger foundation. Now, let's address an uncomfortable issue, which is founders. Oftentimes, they believe that legal documents will protect the business, NDAs, non-competes, non-solicitation agreements. I mean, yes, this can have legitimate purposes, but at the end of the day, they should never be the primary retention strategy that you use for your partners, employees, contractors. Because look, when a highly connected associate decides that they want to leave, well, look, your legal agreement doesn't magically recreate the trust that they built with a client. And of course, I mean, in this case, jurisdiction matters enormously. I mean, depending on where your business is. But look, a clause that looks powerful on paper may have limited practical value depending on the applicable law and circumstances. So the strategic answer, it's not how do we prevent people from leaving. It's how do we build a firm where the client relationship belongs to us rather than the person. So that means, CRM ownership, institutional communication, documented workflows, multiple point of contact, standardized service delivery, succession planning, the intelligence of the firm. And most importantly, I mean, the client experience should be attached to the firm, not just the advisor. And that's how you create organizational resilience. Now, I see this with a lot of our clients. We ask them, how did you go about hiring? And they're like, oh, well, this person had a license. I've known them for, quite a few years. And yeah, they seem motivated. So I, gave them a chance. You need to hire for, with a specific structure. And this is, where many founders make another mistake, which is, again, as I just mentioned, they hire someone because maybe they're smart, they've got some experience, they worked in wealth management for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. They're nice, they used to be a client. These are, some of the things that we hear more often. But look, none of those things tell you whether somebody belongs inside your operation, your firm, your operating system. A high-performing firm, it's not going to be asking, can this person do the job? It asks a different kind of question, which is, how will this person behave when the job becomes difficult? Because look, at the end of the day, technical competence, it's only one variable. I mean, we evaluate candidates across several dimensions. First of all, of course, technical adaptability, Can they learn new systems? Can they adapt, can they adopt new technologies? Are they coachable? Can they change, their process when the firm's process is going to change? Then, what about the work ethics? This is something very important that, many founders skip. And I don't mean, again, as you can see here, we're not talking about performative business. It's actual execution. Do they consider, do they consistently do what they say they will do? What are their core values, morals? Again, I'm not gonna go in details about, how we actually go about recruiting for our clients, but I'm just gonna give you some quick bullet points. Then there is the learning phase, learning orientation. I mean, do they improve? Do they seek feedback? Do they become more valuable every single year? Or did they simply, accumulate years of experience doing the same thing? They want a safe job, and that's pretty much it. They don't do more. Then what about integrity? This is a big one. What happens when nobody's watching? Do they tell you uncomfortable information? Do they take accountability? Do they protect the firm's interests even when doing so is not, personally advantageous? What about the cultural alignment? Something that I've mentioned before as well. Do their behaviors reinforce the firm's value, or will you spend the next 3 years managing around their personality? And this is where the behavioral scorecards that we use become really powerful. So let me give you an example. Again, I'm not going to go into the details about the way we recruit, for our clients, but instead of interviewing 5 people and hoping that one works, we need to have a system. So build a funnel. The same way you build a funnel to acquire clients, the same way you want to build a funnel to get, A players and great talent. So if we think about getting, let's say, 100 candidates enter the top of funnel, then the first filter are going to eliminate candidates who don't meet the basic requirements, whatever that is for your company. And then maybe 100 candidates do become 30. And then you are going to evaluate experience, communication, technical capability, the relevant track record, and whatever your requirements are, you're going to evaluate all of that. Then 30, let's say they become 15. Then you conduct structured behavioral assessment. So 15, let's say they become 8. And then, of course, you want references, scenario testing. You go into a deeper cultural evaluation of that specific person. So 8 do become 5. And only then you do invest, you invest significant founder time. So the objective here, it's not to hire the first person who maybe looks good. The objective is to increase the probability that the person you hire will still be an excellent decision 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. And keep in mind, in this specific case, this happened after 6 years business relationship. So you work 6 years with a business partner, an associate, and then they leave and bring 100 million with them. There is, of course, a litigation in process as well. But again, think about, having this happen. Maybe if you're at 200 million in AUM, of course, they talk 100 million, so they talk 15% after so many years of, work, relationship building, and so on. But what about if this firm was at 500 million and they had taken with them like 250 million? That's more expensive. So we'd rather get this mistake now, rebuild with stronger foundations, infrastructure, systems, so that this will not happen when we scale. And this is something that each firm should be taking into consideration. So again, the objective is to increase the probability that the person you hire will be an excellent decision 3, 5, 10, 20 years down the line. So this is a completely different philosophy at this point. Now, let's talk about, another dimension that really sophisticated firms oftentimes underestimate, which is some, context here. A candidate can be exceptional on paper and still be wrong for a specific firm. Again, just because someone has been working with a competitor or at a bigger firm, and you've seen that they have been outstanding there, doesn't mean that they're the best fit for you. And the reason for that is because, look, clients, for example, they don't exist in a vacuum, right? They have got regional expectations, communication norms, preferences in terms of culture, different attitudes toward authority, different expectations around responsiveness, different perceptions of professionalism, different relationship building behaviors. So when recruiting across regions, don't simply ask, is this person qualified? Ask, will this person's natural behavioral patterns resonate with the client population we serve? And look, as you can see here, that doesn't mean stereotyping. It means understanding what is your actual market. And this goes back to something very important, which is positioning, messaging, the way you position yourself in front of the market. What is your market? What is your audience? And if you're watching and you are general, well, again, you need to go back and look at your foundation, and one of them is positioning. So again, you need to understand the market from the inside out, and your recruiting strategy should literally reflect the client demographics, the geographic footprint, the service model, and the institutional culture. So let's quickly go, about, let's go over the operating model that prevents the next $100 million loss. At this point, the solution is not just a better hire, it's a better system, because in this case, as you can see, in this specific case, the advisor did hire because, they had the licenses, they've known, each other for a couple of years. But then when you asked the deeper questions, the uncomfortable questions to the advisor, they will tell you, well, this person was not coachable. He was stubborn, wanted to do things his way. We didn't have a nice, it was just work. Outside of work, like he couldn't even go for a coffee with the partner. Now, again, you need to have a better system. When it comes down to the top firm, or a firm that is resilient, you should be able to answer 5 questions, just 5 questions. The first one, it's who owns the client relationship, the institution, so you, the firm, as the firm, or the individual. Question 2, where does the client intelligence live? Inside the CRM, the systems, or inside someone's head. Question 3, it's can another employee execute the core workflow? If not, it means you have got a key person risk. Everything depends on one person, that's risky. It's like, for example, if you've got multiple rainmakers, but one accounts for over 80% of the production, that's a problem. Rainmaker, salesperson, whatever it might be. Or let's say if in a company, 80% of the revenue comes from only one client, that's very risky, because if the client leaves, it means you lost 80% of your revenue. Question 4, it's how are employees evaluated? On revenue alone, on behavior, execution, collaboration, retention, cultural contribution. How are you evaluating them? Then question 5, what happens if the best employee that we have leaves tomorrow? And if the answer is we're screwed. Well, again, you don't have a staffing problem, you have an enterprise risk problem. And these are just some of the questions. I'm giving you just 5 for today, but of course, there are way more. Now, the real goal at this point is not growth. And this is the big difference I want every firm owner watching this to understand. The objective is not simply more AUM. It's not more employees. It's not even more revenue. The main objective is to really build an institution where growth doesn't proportionally increase fragility, because there is a dangerous version of growth. Again, you add clients, you add employees, you add revenue, you add complexity. But every additional dollar makes the founder more dependent on individual people, and that's not scalable. That's leverage, but in the wrong direction. Now, the goal is here: more revenue, higher margins, lower key person risk, strong client relationship. The relationship should be held at the firm's level, so institution level, rather than personal. Recruiting should be repeatable, and overall, an operating system that doesn't depend on the founder personally holding everything together. Again, if your business depends on you, let's say you want to sell, you're not going to be able to sell for much, because at the end of the day, a buyer is not buying you, it's buying a business. And if the business is you, they don't want it. That's a big risk for them. So even, by having the right infrastructure, the enterprise value of the firm, in case you want to sell in 10, 20, 30 years, is going to be higher. So look, at the end, this all is for, reminding you that if you are a firm owner trying to scale beyond your current AUM or revenue plateau, the answer probably is not adding 20 hours to your work week. And it probably is not hiring the next person who looks impressive on LinkedIn. Everyone looks impressive on LinkedIn. Your next hire may determine the next stage of your growth or your next operational crisis. That's why when it comes down to us working with our clients, we have got the ideal advisor behavioral scorecard, and it gives you a structured way of evaluating the behavioral characteristics, the operational style, the cultural alignment, and the execution profile of the people that you're considering bringing into your firm. And keep in mind that the question is not, can this person help us grow? The better question, the question that you should be asking yourself is, can this person help us grow without making the organization more fragile? And that's the standard we believe that firms should hire against. So again, after watching this video, don't just, skip, go to the next, or, keep going with your life. Just take all of the details, all of the information, insights that I've given you today based on a, real case scenario that we had for a client. This is why he came to us. And think about you, your business, your infrastructure, your team. Ask yourself questions that are hard to ask. Maybe deep down, if you're a founder, that maybe, someone in your team is not loyal or can steal your clients, your systems, can become a competitor. Ask yourself the difficult questions. Do a deep analysis about your current situation, and think if your infrastructure, if your team that got you where you are now is going to be capable to get you where you want to go. Let's say if you're, at 100 million in AUM, is your current infrastructure going to be able to scale you to 500 million, to 1 billion? And if not, again, perhaps there's something you need to change.